Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I will shortly ask for unanimous consent to pass bipartisan legislation to extend the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terrorism Standards Program, also known as CFATS. This critical counterterrorism program was created in the wake of September 11th and the Oklahoma City bombing to ensure that common chemicals could not be stolen or weaponized by terrorists and used in an attack. Now the program is set to expire on July 27th, tomorrow, and we simply cannot let that happen. There are approximately 3,300 facilities across the United States that participate in this program. These facilities support a range of industries, from chemical manufacturing and distribution to agriculture and food production, paint and coatings operations, and healthcare and pharmaceuticals. In their everyday work, these facilities use materials that, in the wrong hands, can be turned into dangerous weapons. Because these types of industrial or commercially available materials are common and offer a simple pathway to weaponization, terrorists are more likely to try to use them. By participating in the CFATS program, facilities work with the Department of Homeland Security to develop a plan to ensure potentially hazardous material is secure. I introduced bipartisan legislation along with Senators Capito, Carper, and Langford to extend this important counterterrorism program for 5 years. The 5-year extension provides regulatory certainty and the stability for the companies and groups that participate in the program, ensuring that they can keep these important safeguards in place for longer. Companies including Dow, BASF, Lubrizol, and Brenntag North America, along with organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Chemical Council, the National Association of Chemical Distributors, the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, the Agricultural Retailers Association, and the Fertilizer Institute, all of them support extending this vital national security program for another 5 years. However, last night, the House passed a 2-year extension with overwhelming bipartisan support. More than 400 members of the U.S. House voted to extend the program. And while I believe passing a longer extension to provide more certainty for companies and for the DHS would be better, the program will expire tomorrow. And if we do not pass legislation to extend it, our national security could be at risk. If this body allows this program to expire, the 3,300 facilities will no longer be required to maintain security measures, and any new high-risk facilities will not be required to invest in additional security. The Department of Homeland Security will no longer be able to assess whether facilities are high risk or share information about specific terrorist threats connected to chemical facilities. The high-risk chemical facilities would no longer be able to screen individuals who have access to sensitive areas against the terrorist screening database, which is a critical way to ensure that we're keeping these substances from getting into the wrong hands. Since it was created, CFATS has been extended with bipartisan support 4 times. We cannot let this vital program expire. We must take urgent action to pass this 2-year extension that just passed overwhelmingly through the United States House and keep the American people safe from harm. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 4470, which was received from the House, that the bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Kentucky.
reserving the right to object, I rise today to object to the quick passage of H.R. 4470, which seeks to extend the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program. How could anybody be against that? I'm actually for it. We should have terrorism standards. But you know what? We always had these before 9/11. How did it work before the government got involved? Well, companies had to insure things. If you had a $100 million electric plant and it was at risk for sabotage or fire or disruption of the community, you had insurance, and insurance required that you have a fence. I mean, these things happen. It's not as if safety for our utilities and public chemical plants didn't exist before 9/11. So there are ways that the marketplace would take care of this. This measure, though, which would reauthorize this regulatory program for another 2 years, I think is being rushed through the Senate without due consideration, or really any consideration at all. The Homeland Security Committee has jurisdiction over the program, yet we have not had any hearings to discuss this program or its effectiveness. This is part of the problem of government, is we tend to reauthorize things without ever examining whether they work, what doesn't work. Some programs might need more money, some programs might need less money, and we might ask ourselves, do we have any money? You know, we're $32 trillion in debt. We borrow about $1 trillion every year. It's easy to be for stuff. Everybody's got something good, everybody's for something, but where does the money come from? We haven't really had any hearing to discuss this program or its effectiveness since the last time it was authorized, nor has the committee considered any legislation to reform the program. This program is a regulatory program. It's hundreds of regulations, and it was established to prevent the misuse of hazardous chemicals. But it also fails to understand that every company has a self-incentive to protect hazardous chemicals that is built into the nature of the way they do the business. Facilities that store certain quantities of designated chemicals of interest, though, under this legislation, must undergo a risk assessment and inspection every 2 years. If it's not reauthorized, well, it's been going on for 20 years. My guess is that the vast majority, if not all, of the utilities and chemical plants in this country have undergone this. My guess is if the program didn't exist, they would still all have fences and barbed wire and protections against terrorism because they want to protect their investment. The requirement, though, through government, though, places a burden on business, impeding their potential growth and creating unsurmountable barriers to entry for those who find the regulatory compliance too cumbersome and expensive to even attempt to break into the sector. This is why a lot of times big businesses like regulations. Regulations become a formidable barrier to new companies coming into the business. Why not have a ton of regulations? Sort of like banks. All the banking regulation, guess who likes the banking regulation? The big banks, because they can hire more compliance officers. Your local bank in your town, can't afford to do it. So the local bank gets gobbled up by the bigger bank because of regulatory burden. The monetary resources required to implement and maintain these standards are substantial. And the cost implications impact not just private companies, but also the Department of Homeland Security. The United States is trillions of dollars in debt. We cannot continue to just pour money into non-essential government programs. We should have a discussion of what are the private incentives for people to protect their chemical plants, to protect their utilities. There's a long history of this. In fact, it was the history of our country until fairly recently. The Department of Homeland Security has a consistent track record of creating duplicative programs. Over the past 12 years, the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, has documented over 1,100 cases of duplicative programs created by Congress. Everybody's got a great idea. We're going to fix this, but they don't ever take time to look up to find out that somebody had the idea 3 years before and they already created a program to fix this. So sometimes we have as many as 80 different programs to fix a problem that's already been fixed previously 80 times. It should come as no surprise to any of us that our government has grown into a $6.5 trillion leviathan, and this body seems more interested in passing bills than understanding the contents of the bills, the programs, or whether these programs are working. We saved, though, over $550 billion by removing just half of GAO's identified duplicative programs. $550 billion was saved by taking the time to find out that we already have other programs doing what the new program proposes to do. I've already expressed a number of concerns about this program, but what should alarm us most about this reauthorization is that GAO already found much of this program to be duplicative of other agencies in a report from 2021. That's why I will be introducing and attaching to this bill and letting the bill go, frankly, if we can agree today to attach a small bill, but I think that could have profound implications over government. This is called the Duplication Scoring Act. So what would happen is every time someone gets a genius idea how they're going to fix your life or fix your business with another law, there would have to be a duplication score. And government would come forward and say, oh, well, we have 32 programs that already do the same thing. Or we have 32 programs that aren't working that do the same thing. It would be what a government should normally do before creating a new program, find out if we already have existing programs. So I will be asking consent to pass this bill. I'll let the program continue, even though I think it has many problems, if we'll add a duplication scoring system to all programs in government so we can review whether they already exist and are working. This program would be produced for each bill. I think all of us can agree that there's no point in passing a bill that already exists in another fashion or already has agencies that do the same job. Before we unknowingly pass 1,000 more of these duplicative, fragmented programs, I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, which would continue the program, allow it to be reauthorized, but at the same time, begin having a duplication score on every new proposal. So I would ask to the Senate to modify the current request that my amendment, which is at the desk, is considered and agreed to, the bill as amended, be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection to the Senator's request to modify?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. President, I certainly fully appreciate Senator Paul's commitment to making government more efficient. I was pleased that my committee advanced his bill earlier this year. But as I had noted at the time of our passing it out of committee, the bill requires additional work before it's ready to be passed by the full Senate. We have heard from several committees who have concerns about the potential impacts of the legislation. And I hope that we can continue working over the summer to try and address those concerns and find a path forward for this legislation. However, the Chemical Facilities Anti-Terrorism Standards Program is set to expire tomorrow. We urgently need to pass this bipartisan 2-year extension now. If we do not, chemical facilities that are at risk of being exploited by terrorists will no longer be able to implement critical security measures, including ensuring that individuals in the terrorist screening database do not have access to restricted areas in these facilities. And the Department of Homeland Security will no longer be able to assess or share information about terrorist threats related to these facilities. Mr. President, our national security is on the line, and we cannot let this program expire over a completely unrelated bill about the inside workings of Congress. Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard to the modification. Is there objection to the original request?
I object, Mr. President. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to recognize Sharon Cohen, who retires this week from the Senate dining room. Over her almost 3 decades here, Ms. Cohen has left a lasting impression on a number of my colleagues and guests who have visited the dining room, including my children and grandchildren and the whole Senate dining team. Ms. Cohen has seen senators come and go from this building. She's been here longer than most of my colleagues. She's been here longer than I have. I always look forward to seeing Ms. Cohen. She's always welcoming. She's always gracious. She makes an effort to get to know not just every senator, but every guest who comes through the doors, regardless of who they walked in with regardless of their political affiliation. In a place where at times relationships can be tested and debate can be intense, Ms. Cohen always made Senate dining a welcoming place. It's clear to anyone who has met Ms. Cohen that she cares deeply for the people in her life, her family, her colleagues, her guests. She seems to always be thinking about what's best for others. Among her colleagues, Ms. Cohen is known for being steady and reliable, and most importantly, for her generous spirit. She's always helping whomever she can, however she can. She never asks for anything in return. Her colleagues share that they don't think they've ever met anyone who works harder than she, and when she finishes her work, she helps everyone else who needs it. She's a team player, she's a hard worker, maybe most important, she's made a difference for so many people. Maybe all of us, my colleagues and I, can learn from that. The workers in these jobs often don't get a lot of recognition. They're too often ignored, yet they're every bit as important to the Senate as the people on the Senate floor. She brings a dignity to this job, the same kind of dignity that a carpenter who's proud of her work, or a sheet metal worker who's proud of his work, or someone who works in manufacturing, someone who works in a veterans hospital, someone who provides home care. Because all work has dignity, as she understands. Ms. Cohen's a treasured member of staff and of this institution. As her colleagues shared, they're sad to see her leave. While they know things won't be the same without her, they share Ms. Cohen's excitement for her next chapter. In retirement, she plans to spend time with her daughter and help care for her granddaughter. I know that she'll be missed by the Senate dining team. I know we'll all miss seeing her, and I appreciate not just her work, but the work of all people who serve in this body in all kinds of capacities. Ms. Cohen, thank you. Wish you a long, joyous retirement spent with your granddaughter. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. President.
CFATS provides a strong yet flexible approach by setting a consistent national standard. Under CFATS, companies must develop and submit security plans to the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, for approval. The program establishes practical security performance standards to address a wide range of potential threat scenarios, including a physical attack, theft and diversion, and cyber attacks. The standards provide flexibility, which allows facilities to tailor their approach to address unique security risks, and they are adaptable to help address emerging threats. The Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards CFATS program requires a facility that is determined to be high risk to develop and implement security measures that meet applicable risk-based performance standards, RBPS, for securing chemicals of interest, COI. Both the Homeland Security Appropriations Act of 2007, Pub.Re. L. number 109, 295, Section 550, and CFATS 6 CFR Part 27 provide authority for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, to conduct authorization inspections. Specifically, 6 CFR Section 27.250A provides authority for CISA to enter, inspect, and audit the property, equipment, operations, and records of CFATS-covered facilities. While CISA is committed to helping facility personnel understand and comply with CFATS by providing technical assistance or on-site consultation, the agency also has the authority to enforce compliance with the program. CFATS violations. CFATS violations are divided into several categories: failure to file violations, submission of false information security, vulnerability assessment, SVA, site security plan, SSP, alternative security program, ASP, deficiencies generally found during the authorization and approval process, SSP-ASP infractions generally found during compliance inspections, chemical terrorism vulnerability information, CVI, violations, CFATS penalty policy. CISA is authorized to issue an administrative order, A order, and an order assessing civil penalty, B order, to a chemical facility found to be in violation of CFATS. Both A orders and B orders may be appealed pursuant to the procedures set forth in 6 CFR Part 27 Subpart C. Calculating a civil penalty amount, SSP deficiencies and infractions are considered on a case-by-case basis using an established set of criteria to ensure consistent application of civil penalties. First, each security measure deficiency or infraction is categorized as either minor, moderate, or major based on its severity. Minor, $1,000, $2,000 day. A deficiency or infraction in which an RBPS is not fully addressed and the lack thereof is reasonably expected not to pose an immediate impact on the security of the COI. Moderate, $3,000, $6,000 day. A deficiency or infraction in which an RBPS is only partially addressed and poses an immediate and significant impact on the security of the COI. Major, $5,000, $10,000 day. A deficiency or infraction in which an RBPS is significantly or wholly unaddressed and poses an immediate and critical impact on the security of the COI. Once the deficiency or infraction has been categorized, the amount within the applicable range is determined based on whether there are aggravating factors surrounding the deficiency or infraction. In cases where CISA finds multiple deficiencies or infractions, an aggregate per-day penalty amount is calculated based on all the deficiencies or infractions. Fines may continue to accrue until all deficiencies or infractions have been fully corrected. Failure to file violations for top screens and SVA-SSP are calculated on a set schedule at set amounts. The Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards, CFATS Regulation, 6 CFR Part 27, applies to any facility, from an individual to an establishment, that possesses any chemical of interest, COI, at or above the screening threshold quantity, STQ, and concentration listed in Appendix A. Before beginning the CFATS process, check the statutory exclusions. If your facility is not statutorily excluded and possesses any Appendix A COI at or above STQ in concentration, you must report your chemical holdings to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, through a top screen. The purpose of CFATS is to ensure that any facility identified by CISA as high risk following its submission of a top screen has sufficient security measures in place to reduce the risks associated with its COI.